Our very first lesson is on the scientific method. So for definition, what is it? It's a systematic approach used in scientific study. It's an organized process to gather research. It's used to provide evidence for hypotheses, theories, and laws. We're going to break down the parts of it here in just a minute, but for now it might be a good idea to just screenshot this page so that you can see the outline of the scientific method and how it leads us to theories and laws. So if we were looking at the picture from the previous page, you notice that all science starts with observations, okay, which is the act of gathering data. There's two types of data that we can gather. We can gather qualitative data, which is data that describes color, odor, shape, or physical characteristic, okay, and then there's quantitative data. This is data with numbers, so temperature, pressure, volume, mass. So something is 37 degrees Celsius. It's got 2.5 atmospheres of pressure. It's a volume of 257 milliliters. It's got a mass of 16 grams, okay? Their data with numbers is quantitative. Okay, all science begins with observations. So what I'd like you to do is give me at least right now one example of qualitative data and one example of quantitative data using the picture over on the right. So after you've had an observation, it will lead you to a hypothesis. This is a tentative, testable statement or prediction about what has been observed. Okay, tentative meaning that we can change it. Okay, if something is scheduled tentatively, that means that date is changeable. Testable meaning we have to have a way of testing it. So you can't have a hypothesis that's untestable. So you can't make up something about ghosts being responsible for things because we can't test that. Okay, about what has been observed. So it's about the observations that you witnessed. Once you have your hypothesis, you need to design an experiment to test it. An experiment is a set of controlled procedures designed to test the hypothesis. There's variables that we need to include with this. Variables are a quantity or condition changed to gather data, and a good experiment is only changing or testing one variable at a time. Okay, there are two types of variables. There's an independent variable. This is the variable the scientist controls. Okay, sometimes this is called the manipulated variable because the scientist is in control of it. Okay, so whatever the scientist is changing themselves, that's the independent variable. The opposite of that would be the dependent variable. That's the variable the scientist is gathering data on. Okay, so this is the one that we don't have control over. So we have control over independent variables. Dependent variables, scientist does not have control on it. They are just recording data. Okay, these values change based on the independent variable. So based on what the scientist is doing over here. So independent, right? If you're an independent person, you're in charge of yourself, right? You take care of yourself. An independent variable is what the scientist is controlling. Dependent means it relies on this independent variable changing. Okay. Then a good experiment should also have a control group, which is going to create a standard for comparison, something that is kind of your standard group so that we can compare all of these things. So you've run your experiment, you have your data. What do you need to do then? You need to have a conclusion. Okay, so conclusion is some kind of a judgment based on the data obtained. All right, so this is an important thing. There are two types of conclusions you can reach. Okay. The first is that you can support your hypothesis, all right? The second is that you can reject your hypothesis, all right? You cannot prove the hypothesis is true, okay? So whatever your hypothesis was, if your data starts to back it up, that does not mean you've proven it true. That just means you have support showing that you have some evidence that this might be the case. However, you can reject it, okay? So if your data goes against what you hypothesize, then you can reject it and say this is definitely not correct. Okay, but we cannot prove hypotheses to be true. We can just get support for it. So it's a good point going forward to remember that you can't prove hypotheses, but you can support them. So you've run your experiment, you've got your conclusion, you've got a lot of support for your hypothesis. Where do you go from there? Well, then we start looking at the world of theory and law. So you've run your experiment, you've got your data. Now scientists and the rest of the world are going to be looking to replicate your experiment to get that data verified, to make sure that it works in a variety of different situations. So they do that enough, eventually we can lead to theories. Okay, a theory is an explanation of a natural phenomenon based on many observations and investigations over time. It states a broad principle of nature that has been supported over time. Theories are still subject to new data and can be changed. Okay, So that doesn't necessarily mean these are proven to be true. Okay, so if you think of theories like the theory of gravity, well, we don't have anything to go against the theory of gravity right now, and the equations that we've got for it seem to work out. We have the theory of evolution in the biology world. Okay, that is, it's the best explanation that we've got right now. Now, if something comes along that shows us that we've got better evidence for something else, then we, could get rid of this theory of evolution or the theory of gravity, whatever it might be. Okay, so they're still subject to change if we get new data that rejects either of these things. Okay. And so that's the world of theories. Okay, you've got a hypothesis that's got a lot of evidence supporting it. Okay, so what is a law then? A law is a little bit different than this because it is a direct relationship. It's how one thing correlates exactly to something else within nature that is supported by many experiments. Scientists develop more hypotheses to explain why these relationships exist. So this is something that we've noticed about the natural world that is true, that we're trying to explain why is it true. Okay, here, this is something that we've got evidence to support what we are observing, but don't necessarily know that it's true. Okay, a law summarizes what happens. Okay, summarizes what happens, while a theory attempts to explain why it's happening. Okay, what I'd like you to do here is to read this experiment. Okay, all the parts, there's going to be observations, hypothesis, an experiment, independent variable, dependent variable, control group, conclusion. There's going to be several questions that I'm going to ask you, but I want you to read this experiment and see if you can pick out the parts of it correctly.